Colleagues, forgive me for the abbreviated lunchtime today, but we are seeking to, unlike Usain Bolt, but more like Shelley and Fraser Price, trying to make up for lost time. I'd like to take us into the next presentation. I know I had earlier indicated that we are now in possession of the address from the Honorable Secretary General. However, I just ask you to bear with us. It is taking a little longer than expected to download the file, and there are some technical issues that are not compatible with downloading the file and having this program running at the same time. So the presentation from the Honorable Secretary General, we may actually have to play that tomorrow after we have closed the webinar platform for the day. The alternative is, which I don't think I'd like to consider, is that we could ask everybody to sign out, we'll download the presentation and then ask everybody to rejoin, but we'll not embark on that exercise. So unfortunately, we do promise that we'll have the Secretary General's presentation able for presentation to be published tomorrow morning when you join us. Allow me, colleagues, to welcome the next speaker. The next speaker is Mr. Gary Peace. Mr. Peace is an expert insider, threat and information security professional. He's a NUX e-discovery specialist and examiner, a certified forensic investigator, an experienced information security ISO 27001 practitioner, a business continuity management consultant, an EU GDPR practitioner and auditor, a detective, an accredited criminal investigator, an intelligence officer. He's a police national database auditor. Gary is an internal threat expert and anti-corruption investigator. He is the CEO and founder of a boutique firm with global reach, specializing in internal investigations, insider threat, and cyber information security. As former head of the digital investigations for the UK Competition and Markets Authority's digital investigation team, he successfully established and led the digital investigation laboratories for the regulator. Previously, he was also employed for over 17 years with Scotland Yard's Metropolitan Police Service as a frontline investigation operational police officer. He investigated police corruption at the highest levels, including 7 years as Scotland Yard's sole professional standards network investigator, responsible for all investigations concerning misuse of or leakage from the source forces corporate network. He was also responsible for setting up and running their insider threat capability, used extensively on covert and proactive corruption investigations. His key strengths included, but are not limited to, data breach investigations and response, leading internal e-discovery investigation, which includes cartels and money price fixing, designing robust counter-corruption and corporate information security management policies, and business continuity plans. In closing, we just list some of Mr. Peace's completed assignments. Head of Digital Forensics and Intelligence Laboratories, UK Competition and Markets Authority. 2, delivering strategic change within OFT CMA's digital forensic team. Implementation delivery of SOC, SIEM services to clients. Information Security Management System, ISMS, and insider threat audit creation, implementation. Also, ladies and gentlemen, cyber protection for HNW, private clients and family offices, internal investigation, leak inquiries for UK government consultancies, charities and corporate clients, whistleblowing inquiries. How I met Gary years ago, the Jamaican murder trial. He was one of three UK police officers who came and gave evidence in what was known as the Boulevard murder, a case I prosecuted, where they gave evidence on cell site analysis. Now, I could go on and on, but time does not allow. But Mr. Peace is also very busy. He's a school governor, safeguarding and child protection. He's vice chair of the Island Preschool Isle of Wight. He's elected a county councillor and cabinet member of the Isle of Wight from May 2017. He's an expert in sailing, and he has his private pilot's license. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to allow me to welcome Mr. Gary Peace, an expert in his own right in many ways. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dirk. I appreciate the invite to speak with you all and to present today. It really is it's an honour. And who'd have known that 10 years ago when we worked on the Boulevard trial that I'd be sitting here helping out with one of your presentations. So thank you very much, and to everybody else who's watching and listening. I hope I do Dirk justice on this presentation. So without further ado, let me move onwards and start the presentation. Can you see my screen, Dirk? Are we good, Dirk? Can you see it?
Not yet, not yet. Yes, we have it now.
Ah, brilliant. Okay. I'm also pretty cognizant of the conversation that the presentation from Professor Johnson when he's talking about corruption in public life and with politicians, and I'm sitting here as an elected official in my spare time on a very small island where everyone knows everyone, which is the Isle of Wight. So I'm very careful what I'm going to say and do from this point onwards. I also wanted to touch on what Toussaint had said earlier about prevention is the best form of corruption fighting, if you like. I'm going to talk about corruption, but I'm also going to talk about insider threat. Now, if you look at the figures around solving the insider threat problem within companies, it's so much more cheaper to put the systems and the governance and the controls in place before something happens, rather than waiting and trying to clear up the mess afterwards. So, I'm very, very firmly in his camp around concentration should be on prevention first. But let's head on with the presentation. So, I'm going to talk about insider threat. I'm going to talk about corruption, but you can't get away from cyber nowadays, especially when you talk about insider threats. Information is the new gold. It's the new oil. It has value. So that really is the currency now for information. It has a value to it. So data and information is very much part of it, and we're in a connected world now, especially since COVID. You've got to have those systems in place, both technical and people-based systems. So you've got to have a really holistic response. Now, when I talk to any of my clients, and this includes government, it includes private organisations and charities, there are three key outcomes that everyone is after. The first is to protect IP, intellectual property, but actually that also includes information and includes data, because that has the big value nowadays. So one of the questions I always ask my clients, and it's one of the things that you should even consider yourselves, is just how resilient is your organization against the loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data that you hold. So what I mean by confidentiality? Well, who can get hold of that data that shouldn't have access to it? Integrity, how correct, up to date and accurate is that data? And then lastly, availability. Can you get hold of that data when you need to? Actually, these things, it's called the CCAICACB triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is part and parcel of every information security guideline and standard around the world, including ISO 27001, including the American NIST standards and others. But actually, it's also part of the UK, of the EU GDPR. If you can't get to your data, it's actually classed as a data breach, as is a failure to have up-to-date and accurate information. So these requirements are part and parcel of everything you need to do to protect data. So one of the things you should be considering is we all need to know where we're going, where we're starting from. We've got a destination we want to get to, which is to eliminate corruption, but we need to know where we're starting from. So one of the questions you need to kind of ask is, how good are you on this CCAICACB triad? Have you really got no idea how resilient your organization is? Or would you class yourself in the dark green as really secure and resilient? I'm guessing most organizations are probably somewhere in the middle, on the yellow and the light green. The next question is, or the next outcome is about preserving assets. Now, information is an asset, but I'm not referring to assets as information in this particular concept. What I'm talking about is your IT, your infrastructure, but also your money. Because as we've talked about today, corruption all comes down to, or to a great extent, it comes down to money, and where's that money flowing, whose back pocket is it going into, and what is the effect that money not going somewhere, what effect is that going to have? So it's about preserving our assets. So how effective is your organization in your information security management? Now, a lot of clients will say, well, what do you mean? We haven't got any. Others will say, actually, we've got a completely integrated approach. We know exactly who's got access to our data, where it's going to, what's happening with it. Again, most people are going to be somewhere in the middle. And then lastly, perhaps most importantly, especially when we're talking about corruption, especially for governments and countries, is we're talking about reputation. But actually, this also includes companies as well. If you damage your reputation, then quite often that's the end of the business. But an allegation of corruption against a country or an organization is also huge in terms of customer churn and reputations and transparency, integrity, and all that kind of stuff. So this is the next thing. So that's securing reputations. So how compliant are you with best practice and standards in your organization? I touched on GDPR earlier. The Americans have got their own privacy laws. The Caribbean nations, the Caribbean countries are all going to have their own standards and governance and controls. So governance in itself and compliance isn't in itself the answer to corruption, but it's part of that picture. And it's a very useful benchmarking process to match yourself against. So again, would you say you're non-compliant, or would you say you're beyond compliant? And when I say beyond compliant, I say that because compliance isn't going to protect you from cyber attack. It's not going to protect you from hacking. Going beyond compliance will. So they're the three key outcomes. What I'm going to touch on or describe to you now is a model I've developed, and it's a pyramid. The base of the pyramid, if we look at our key outcomes, the base of the pyramid is people with really no idea or really how bad they are. They don't have any information security management system in place, and they're not compliant. Now, I'm going to term this the surrendered line. And effectively, the reason I'm doing this is because if we look at cyber and we look at insider threat, there is a cyber war going on between Western powers, between Russia, China, North Korea. And that war, because it involves information, will also bring into scope insider threats and possibly corruption, because those disgruntled employees who become insider threat may also become a corruption issue. So I'm going to frame this in terms of fighting a war. So if you're at the bottom line, effectively you've surrendered. Now there's a line there called the fear of ignorance line. Now that line stops people from going over, quite often because people fear that they don't know what to do, they don't know how bad things are. You know, they're not going to look for corruption because they're scared of what they're going to find. The other side of that, ignorance, is people that say, actually, you know what, we're fine, we've got things in place, it's not a problem for us. Now, to a greater or less extent, you know, depending on which countries around the world you talk to, corruption is a bigger problem in some than it is in others. It doesn't really matter. If the people are a bit like cyber, if you know they think, well, we're immune to cyber attack or we're immune to corruption, then actually they're not the sort of people that that generally will listen to these presentations going onwards. What I also find is that when people are in this level, quite often, and I'll classify it by having disorganized data, they've got no systems, they've got no control, they don't know what information they have, who has access to it, or what's going on with that data. It's disorganized, it's unmanaged. And here's what I said before, the red zone myth, you know, we're okay, it won't happen to us. Well, actually, if you cross over that fear and ignorance line, there's a truth when you get to the amber, and it basically is that everyone gets hacked. There is corruption everywhere, and that's the truth behind it. The main difference is that the people in the amber know that they're being attacked. Those in the red haven't got a clue. But you've got some sort of baseline security in place. You've got some compliance in place. You've got some systems and some security. Quite often what I also find here is one of the answers that comes back to me when it comes to protecting information is that IT have got it covered. I will caution against that. IT are great at running a network and making things work. IT should not be managing your information security. It's a separate skill set. The IT manage everything kind of harks back several years back to when we had IT security and there wasn't really an information security industry. That needs to change. IT should not be in charge of your information security efforts. If we move up to the next line, the light green, what I'm going to call this, I'm calling it fighting back. And essentially this means that there are some protections in place. Your preservation, your information security management system, you've got, it's quite recent, isn't it? It's not too bad. And you're compliant. You know, you've gone along and you've ticked those compliance boxes and you've got some sort of compliance process in place. That's really, really great. What it means is that effectively, and what I give to various people with these models is a battle-tested plan. It's been fought in the real world. I know how breaches happen. I know how people steal data. And we can put systems and processes in place to stop that happening. So it's a battle-tested plan. And then the next line is it's the good enough line. And quite often lots of people come to this and they say, yeah, you know what, we're spending enough money, we're certified, we're compliant, that's good enough. But actually, if you look at Apple, for example, if Apple had stopped at the iPod and said, you know what, that's good enough, would we now have an iPhone? Would we have iPads, etc., etc., etc.? If you look at, you know, Usain Bolt, for example, if he'd have stopped at saying, I'm just going to get onto the national team and I'm not bothered about winning medals, that's not really good enough. You expect those people to go that one stage further. And that's what you have to do to achieve complete integrity and security when you're talking about corruption and insider threat. The truth is, compliance won't, you know, it's not going to be good enough. It's not going to get you to that top level, which is about winning battles. When you're winning battles, you are secure, you're resilient. You've got an integrated approach to how you're dealing with the corruption problem or your insider threat problem. And as I said, you're going beyond compliant. It's an integrated defense. You can't have everything in silos. You've got to bring everything together so that everyone knows what everyone else is talking about. One of the previous speakers mentioned this. I think it was Toussaint actually, in the way that he's managing corruption within the bank. It's about bringing all those separate departments together so that there is a communication path up to the board so that proper decisions can be made. Now I'm going to come on to another period, but I'm talking about an iceberg this time. If we talk about integrity, actually, very much as an iceberg, you can only see 10% of that iceberg. And it's very much when you talk about corruption and you talk about integrity or even cyber. If you're only looking at it from a very shallow perspective, you're not going to achieve the things you want to achieve. As with an iceberg, the wind's blowing one way, it's not going to affect where the iceberg is going to go. The iceberg will be driven by the currents. And if you want to change how corruption is managed, how insider threats managed, and even cybersecurity, you've got to look a lot deeper in order to affect that change. So protecting of your IP, your data, preservation of assets and securing reputation isn't really enough, is it? It's a lot more than that. So I believe, we believe that every organization, every great organization deserves what I'm calling Aegis, which is it's the protection, it's the backing of an organization or a person. And that's what I really believe in. And so what I'm going to show you next is my the model, how my Aegis model, how we achieve that for our clients. And it's an Aegis, it's protection from corruption, unauthorized access, and harm and misuse. So if I move on to my Aegis model, so here we have it. And these are the three key outcomes that we're looking to protect. So it's protecting our information, it's preserving our assets, our money, the bottom line, and it's securing our reputation, perhaps the most important. But actually, you need to be looking at all three of these. Now, in order to protect your information and secure your reputation, you need to have insight into what's going on. As I said before, you need to move from a siloed approach into an integrated one, so you get all of the information together so that you can act on it properly. We all know, teams don't talk to other teams, departments don't talk to other departments, IT won't talk to HR. It's all these kind of things that we need to change in order to get proper insight and knowledge about what's going on. If we're now looking at protecting our intellectual property or data and preserving our assets, actually we need clarity. You've got your information coming in, you need to know what it means. And it's about working out what is going on, moving from the unknown to the known. And then we move on to response. If you're going to preserve those assets and you're going to secure your reputation alongside protecting your IP, actually you need to have a proper thought out and planned response to whatever happens. Whether that's a server going down, whether that's suddenly discovering that someone's been arrested for stealing data or passing data on to a third party. You need to have a deliberate and an organized response, moving from a disorganized approach, which you'll have if you don't have those plans in place. So there are three levers, and without insight, you've got no strategy. Without clarity, there is no action. And without a response, you've got no ability to affect the change, and you've got no ability to deliver that Aegis, that protection for the organization. Now, when I'm looking at these three levers and our key outcomes, what I've developed is there are 9, I'm going to call them accelerators. And these accelerators have a direct impact on what's happening to the levers. So first of all, we talk about information capital. What do I mean here? Well, I mean, what visibility do you have over your entire network, your entire estate? Do you know all of the IT, all of the equipment, the shadow IT, those unauthorized iPhones or computers that are being used on the network, those Wi-Fi routers that might have been plugged in unofficially, social media, employees using social media and using Gmail and Hotmail and all these other things outside of the control of the organization. You need to collect all that information and bring it all in. And we're talking whistleblowing lines, reporting lines, we're talking informants, we're talking employees. If you look at your own teams, you're all going to know people on those teams, someone who's got maybe marital problems, someone's got a debt problem, someone who's got a gambling habit. Everyone knows this, but actually it generally stays on the team and it doesn't go up the chain. It doesn't go anywhere in the organization in which you can actually use that information in order to help your risk assessment around people and around data. So we've got a system that we call the information collection funnel, which is what we can put in place so that organizations know where to get that data from and how to bring it into a proper system. Then the next is something called informed narrative. What I mean by this is context. It's all very well having information. Information is great on its own, but actually, unless you apply context to it, it doesn't really mean anything. What I mean by this is, let's say you've got a person who started coming in early and staying late at night. Maybe he's using a computer that he's never used before. And he's been seen by cleaners and so on and so forth. Maybe they're sending emails from home at 1 o'clock in the morning. That in itself is maybe no cause for concern. There may be a legitimate reason. Maybe that person's a carer. Maybe they're coming in early, they're going home late because they've got something on at home. Maybe they're just avoiding the wife or the partner. It could be any of those things. But unless you know what's going on, you can't apply context to it. It may also be that that person is looking for another job, or they've got another job, and the reason they're coming in early or they're going home late is because they're sticking a USB stick in and they're sucking off data. Maybe those emails that are sent at 1 o'clock in the morning are your policy and your procedures, maybe your security plans. The point is you need to know about it and you need to apply context to whatever's happening. And then we apply that to the critical pathway. There's something called the critical pathway to insider threat. It's a research provable document. There's been loads and loads of work going on behind the scenes to develop it. And basically what it shows us is that there are certain stressors in life that push people over the edge. One of the speakers earlier, I think it was Candice actually, she mentioned stressors in everyday life. People at the moment are losing their jobs. They're not being able to work. There's huge money worries. That is a key stressor for someone who's going to start to steal data and then sell it on to a competitor or sell it on to organised crime. That's one of the things we need to look at. Another stressor is bullied as a child, a bad relationship with mum and dad. These stressors all count against the insider threat, but they're also true for people like the spies that have sold secrets to foreign powers. There's a documented evidence that proves that if you have certain stressors in life, then it makes you more vulnerable to a corrupt approach, or it makes you more vulnerable to becoming corrupt. One of those other stressors, that I think it was the professor mentioned also, is about treating people fairly. From a lot of the work I've done around insider threat, if you've got people don't come into an organization as disgruntled employees. They come into an organization wanting to do great, they've got a new job, they're really happy, they're excited. Then they become unhappy for various reasons. Maybe because they've been treated unequally. Maybe they were promised a course and they didn't get it. Maybe they were passed over for promotion. That unhappy employee becomes a disgruntled employee. That disgruntled employee, 9 times out of 10, they'll just leave and they'll go somewhere else. But there's that 1 time in 10 that they become an insider threat and they start to steal data or they start to damage IT and equipment. And that's what you need to worry about. So that's why we need to have a great information flow. We need to apply context to it, and then we need to assess that against the critical pathway to see what the risk is against that particular person. Then we come on to what I call the security compass. The security compass is essentially, it's your tactical assessments, it's your intelligence assessments. It's looking at that information that we've gathered in the insight lever, and then it's applying all that information, that context against those stresses and those risk indicators so that you build up a proper intelligence picture of what's going on to that person. And maybe assessing whether this is an immediate tactical threat we need to deal with now, or is it something that's coming down the line and we're seeing a growing picture of an issue. and it's about identifying those issues. Organisational ecosystem. We've touched on it previously. We've talked about governance, compliance. I'm going to also talk about insider threat management systems, so that it's the policies, it's the procedures, it's your checklists, it's all those things. It's also about the leadership setting a strategic direction. What is good, what is bad, what is acceptable within an organisation and what isn't acceptable. What do they think about anti-corruption? What do they think about transparency? It all comes from the top, because if it doesn't come from the top, no one else is going to bother down below. So that's what I'm talking about, the organisational ecosystem. It's your governance, it's your management and that kind of stuff, and it's your leadership. Life cycle framework. Again, this is touched on. Who you get into the organisation, put it this way: if you have a cleaner in your house, you're going to, before you give them the keys and you allow them unfettered access, you're going to want to know who they are. So why do we allow people into our organisations who haven't got a clue what they are and who they're doing, whether they've got a criminal record, this kind of stuff? When people come into an organisation, they should be vetted, and depending on the level of their work and their access to data, that vetting level should be different. But everyone should have something. Then when they get into that organisation, there should be an onboarding process. They should be indoctrinated into the company culture. They need to be informed about what happens, who does what. They have presentations from all the different departments. What it means is that everyone starts to get to know who everybody else is. And that's really, really important. And it sets that culture in stone. But what it also means is that when I say life cycle, it means when they come in, let's say they've been in with the firm for 3 years, well, maybe it's time to vet them again, because you don't know what's happened in the last 3 years. They may have got divorced, they may have picked up a gambling habit. You just don't know. So they should be vetted at regular periods of time. If they get promoted, vet them again. If they move into something where their access to data is more confidential, then vet them to a greater extent. Look at their finances and so on and so forth. This should be an ongoing process that never stops. And then when it comes to them leaving, before they leave, you take their ID cards off of them, you take your equipment off of them, you make sure that you follow a checklist and that HR tell IT that this person is leaving, and therefore IT know that they follow their checklist and they start removing access, removing controls, etc., etc., etc. And then when they go, announce it to everybody. If you're down the bar or the pub or whatever, and you're with Joe Bloggs, if you didn't know that he was now no longer in the company and he's gone and work for a competitor, what's to stop you talking about sensitive information? Whereas if you inform everybody that Joe Bloggs is now gone and remind them that they shouldn't be talking about sensitive information with them if they happen to meet up, then all the better. So that's what I mean about a life cycle framework. Coming on to what we call a duty playbook. This is that instruction manual. We have it for those who've investigated murders and so on and so forth. There's a murder manual. It's a checkbox instructions. These are the things you need to cover to make sure that you've ticked off all those boxes. It's not a tick box mentality, but it's a checklist to make sure that you've not missed anything. And you should have this for all incident response. In the Caribbean, you're well used to tropical storms. You all know what happens when a tropical storm comes in and what you're supposed to do. Make sure you're doing the same thing with a cyber incident response. Make sure you know what you're doing if someone is arrested for a corruption allegation, or even make sure you're ticking off certain boxes when it comes to investigating someone who's suspected of being corrupt. That's what I mean by the duty playbook. Information assurance. Cybersecurity isn't everything. Cybersecurity focuses on technical stuff, not paper records, but actually how much stuff is sitting on people's desks. How many filing cabinets do we all have confidential information in? Think of notice boards. What is the information that's been pinned to a notice board? And how confidential or sensitive is that information? What you need to be looking at is that, for example, when I worked in anti-corruption, we were all siloed off, information going to a central point, but the teams, we had 4 anti-corruption teams, and we may be investigating somebody else on the other anti-corruption team for all we knew. So therefore, our office doors were shut, they were locked, no one was allowed in. If it came to the cleaners weren't allowed in. So we picked the bins up, the bins went outside the door, and that's where the cleaners picked up that information from. So you've got to be looking at what your data is, what the crown jewels are what is classified as confidential, secrets, and what isn't. And then you have to base your protections of that data around that classification. And then lastly, we're talking about legal and compliance. For example, if you're looking at investigating someone and you want to monitor their emails in the UK, we're not allowed to do that willy-nilly. We have to get authority to do so. If we're going to do it covertly, it has to be a serious criminal offence, it has to be a gross misconduct offence, and then the authorisation has to be for a limited period of time by a senior member of the organisation, and it can't be a fishing expedition. So whatever you do when you're investigating staff or third-party contractors or someone in your supply chain, you need to make sure that whatever you do, it is actually legal and it's compliant with whatever legislation and whatever regulations you have in place. If you do all of that, you get true Aegis. You protect information, you protect reputation, and you preserve assets. Very quickly running through. That's my whistle-stop tour of insider threat management and anti-corruption investigations and how to conduct them. I'm sorry I couldn't go into more detail. I'd love to, but if you've got any questions, then here's my details. Feel free to get in contact whenever you like. It's always free to talk. Thank you, Dirk.
Thank you very much, Gary. Excellent presentation. And I will start the ball rolling, but I just invite colleagues to be reminded of the contact details for Gary, which I'm sure he'll put back on the screen shortly. But Gary, I start with a very a point you made, but I ask you for some clarity on it.
Yes.
You made the point that IT should not manage information. So
yes.
Based on that, as you explain it, who would then manage IT?
This comes back to it was a comment Toussaint was talking about earlier, and having, whenever you do anti-corruption or insider threat management, there needs to be an independent body that does those investigations, and it needs to be a unit that sits on its own outside of the control of anybody else. The problem with IT having control of information security is that quite often, certainly in the UK, and I know in the States a lot, people see everything as just an IT problem. And the board members, the management see it as, oh, it's an IT thing, and therefore they switch off and they don't worry about it. And because of that, you need to change that that perception. The other thing is that IT are there to run a network. Now, go back years and years and years when things were much more simple. Yes, IT security, it was the IT guys that did it. We didn't have insider threats stealing data like we do now. And the whole cyber world is very, very complex now, and it's a completely separate skill set from IT. I do information security, but I wouldn't dream of running a network anything bigger than the one I run now. And even with my own office network, I've got people I rely on who know the business far better than I do. So it's not, I know a certain amount, but I know what I don't know. So whatever you do, if you have IT, they're a stakeholder, absolutely, for sure, but they should not be managing information security. It should be, as I say, a separate unit answerable to the board, and they are the guys that, or the guys and the girls that are responsible for an overview, an overarching view of everything within the organization. So from finance to IT to HR. The idea is that all those separate units all report in to the Insider Threat Management Board or the Anti-Corruption Board or whatever you want to call it. But information security should not be the domain of IT.
Thank you very much for that. You spoke also about vetting of staff, and certainly you gave the example certainly of the cleaners come in for something and probably they want to enter, for example, IT, but the bucket will be put outside the garbage container for them to collect it there. But in terms of the selection of staff, whether one uses psychometric testing, whether one uses other type of systems, can you speak a little bit about that in terms of the selection of staff and the sort of processes that may be employed? Certainly subject, of course, to the legal systems and what the law permits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, vetting means different things to different people. So, for example, at its very lowest level, it could be we're just checking references, and this might be something you do for the cleaner or someone who hasn't got any access to any sensitive information, or access to particular systems or sensitive areas. So it might just be a case of, right, have you got references? Yes or no? Okay, in you come. But depending on the organization, you need to look at some baseline security standards, basic criminal records checks. You know, have they got a criminal record? Now, that doesn't stop you employing someone. So, for example, I worked for a company that are in the space industry in the UK, and they'd grown massively over a short space, over a few short years. They come into a lot of money from the European Space Agency, so on and so forth. And the problem they had is they were still operating as a bunch of scientists who just collaborated over Gmail or Hotmail or whatever. You know, for a start, they needed to get away from free email. You know, email isn't, Gmail and that kind of stuff isn't free. You are the product for that email. So, and this is why you get targeted results when you search Google. It's because Google are analyzing what your search results are, what your emails are, so on and so forth. So you need to be on a proper email system for a start. Now, what happened in this particular organization was that they pulled all of their data and it was just sat in one great big pot with everyone having access to everything, which is great in theory, but there's no security around your intellectual property at all. So one of the things I came in and I suggested was, well, actually, you need to classify your data into confidential or restricted or secret or whatever it is. And then you need to make sure there is access control. So stopping people who shouldn't have access to data to get access to it. So that's kind of the first thing. And then because of the organization, they were so stretched for staff, they said, well, actually, we haven't got anyone to do that. So we need to recruit someone to come in and we're going to give them access to all of our sensitive information and they're going to start classifying it and put it into the compartments it needs to be in. And I said, yeah, that's absolutely fine. But what you need to do is make sure you vet that person. Now, it was one hell of an argument for me to get them to actually vet them because they didn't understand the issue. So a person came in, I was involved with the vetting, and I said to this person, I said, look, just tell the vetting officer absolutely everything that's gone on because it doesn't go any further, but we need to manage the risk. And that's what it's all about. You know, if you've committed an offence, doesn't mean to say you don't get the job. It just means that we're able to manage those risks. So, and this person said this, they said, yeah, I've been done for drink drive. No, I've been done for criminal damage. I had a neighbour dispute and that's what happened. And I said, yeah, okay, that's absolutely fine. So this person then went through for the vetting, started the job because the client wanted to get them on board as quickly as possible. 3 days in to having this particular job, the vetting actually came through and was complete and showed that the person had been done for drink drive 3 days, a few days before. I think what the individual wanted to, they basically thought they'd get the job and the vetting would come through before it appeared on their criminal record. It didn't. So the conversation I then had to have with the head of HR was actually, do you really want this person in your organization? Because you've given them access to all of your crown jewels, all of your sensitive information, but they've just lied about being convicted for drink driving. And actually you live in the countryside and they're driven to work. You know, there's a whole bunch of other things there, but it all comes back to integrity and it comes back to trust. But it comes back to the amount of and the sensitivity of the data those people are after, it could simply be a letter of response to say, yes, I know Joe Boggs, but you might have to look at criminal records check. You might then also, if it's really sensitive information, start looking at financial records to see if there's unauthorized payments. It really does, the level of vetting changes depending on what the risk level is that you assign to that particular role.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation.
Thank you.
At this time, we have no questions, but certainly once you share, could you just repeat for me your contact detail so I could share it with colleagues?
Yes, it's
If you,
Gary. Email is Gary Peace, all one word.
yes,
At ESID Echo Sierra India Delta.co.uk.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trust you'll be able to stay with us.
Yes.
And
yeah,
thank you so much.
No, actually, there's been some really good presentations. Really been very interesting.
Thank you.